Well, thanks to everyone who's joined early. We're going to get started here in about 60 seconds, so stand by. Well, Micki, my clock just struck 1 o'clock. Do you want to go ahead and get started?
Yes, we certainly can.
All right, cool. Well, good afternoon, everyone, if you're on the East Coast, and good morning if you're on the West Coast or somewhere in between. Thanks for being here for today's Bloomerang webinar, Project Planning to Win Grants. And my name is Stephen Shattuck, and I'm the VP of Marketing here at Bloomerang, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. And before we begin, just want to go through a couple of housekeeping items. Just want to let everyone know that I am recording this presentation, and we will be sending out the recording as well as the slides later on this afternoon. So if you have to leave early or if you want to review the content later on, you'll be able to do that. Just look for an email from me a little on before the end of the day. And as you're listening today, I would love for you to send us some questions. Send us comments and questions through the chat box there on your screen. I'll see those, Micki will see those, and we're going to save some time towards the end of the presentation for a little bit of a formal Q&A. So don't be shy there. We are going to save some time for that, and we've got a grants expert here on the line to answer your questions, probably about 10 or 15 minutes, so don't be shy at all. We'd love to hear your thoughts during the presentation. And just in case this is your first Bloomerang webinar with us, welcome. If that's the case, we do these webinars just about every Thursday. They're totally educational, totally free to the public. In addition to that, Bloomerang offers some donor management software. That's our business. That's what we do on a day-to-day basis. So if you're in the market for that, if you're interested in learning more, I would love for you to do that. You can get a video demo of the software. You don't even have to talk to a salesperson if you don't want to. So if you're interested in that, please do that. Just go to our website and click Demo. So I want to go ahead now and introduce today's guest. She is Micki Vandeloo. Hey, Micki, how's it going?
It's going wonderful. Beautiful day here in St. Louis, Missouri.
Yeah, that's good. It's nice here in Indy, too. I'm really happy to have you. We started talking about this webinar last November. We haven't done a lot on grants, and that's something that has been requested of us a lot, so it's super to have you. For those of you who don't know Micki, she's got over 10 years of experience writing grants. She's obtained over $4 million in grant funding for both for-profit and nonprofit clients in her career. She published a great guide, the For-Profit Grant Writing Guide, in 2014. Just to help grant writers understand the research and all the process that goes in there. Micki's a board member of the St. Louis chapter of the Grant Professionals Association. She's a member of the GPA Foundation Board, and she attained her Grant Professionals Certified. That's what that GPC stands for, in case you were wondering. She obtained that credential back in September of 2013. She also received the 2014 Pauline G. Inario Award from the Grant Professionals Certification Institute for her efforts for advancing grant professionals. Just an all-around expert. Awesome bio. Micki, I'm really, really excited to hear all you have to say about grants. So I'm going to pipe down. I'm going to let you take it away and tell us all about project planning to win grants. So go for it, Micki.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Stephen. That was a great introduction. I'm really happy to be here with everybody today, and this is actually this is kind of a sweet spot in, I guess, my repertoire of training for grants, because I feel very strongly, based on my experience, that this is probably the most overlooked aspect of grant writing that there is. If I do a search on grant writing and I look through agendas and curriculums for training courses, I really don't see a lot of effort being put into explaining how to plan projects to win grants. Now, there are courses, but generally they're tied in with a grant writing course, so it's kind of glossed over, I guess. So I'm really excited to be talking about this with all of you today. In this webinar, we're going to talk about a few different elements, and I want to keep my talk fairly short because I want to leave time for you to ask questions. The real key to this is that you understand the role of project planning and that you understand how to make it work for you when you're writing grants, but I know you're going to have some questions specific to your nonprofit or your organization, and I very much encourage you to ask those questions, and I will try to leave plenty of time. I'll try not to go on, and I'll try to leave plenty of time. So we're going to talk about, I'm going to do a quick introduction of myself. I'm going to talk about the role of project planning in the grant writing process. I'm going to discuss a little bit how to put together the ideal project team, the elements of a project plan, uses for the project plan, and tools and tricks to help you succeed. And I have a really great resource that I'm going to be offering to all of you who attend this webinar at the end of this that I think is going to really help you as you move forward. And as you write your next grants, it'll help give you a really great way to prepare for that grant. So basically, Stephen talked about a lot of this. My life has really been all about the numbers. The 25 represents the number of years I have worked in and around for-profit companies, particularly in manufacturing. Most people that are grant writers are English majors. They were English majors in college. They might have a journalism degree. I have met a few people that maybe were scientists or somebody that, and they typically now do grants for universities or scientific research, my degree is actually, my bachelor's is actually in industrial engineering, which I think is probably the oddest route that I have heard as of yet to get to a grant writing career. I got my bachelor's in industrial engineering, and then I got my MBA, and I've spent 25 years working in and around manufacturers. But oddly enough, that actually, in that community of manufacturers is actually where I got my introduction to grant writing. Basically, I started writing grants for manufacturing companies to train their employees when I was working in a manufacturing consulting firm. And so I started writing grants then and absolutely fell in love with it. I always had kind of this creative slant, and so that's how I got into grant writing. And also now, I have written a lot for nonprofit companies, but my grant writing efforts now specifically focus on for-profit companies, organizations that serve for-profit companies, particularly manufacturers, and large nonprofits. However, I have worked with small nonprofits. I have done that work in the past, so I think I am experienced enough to answer your questions. That just isn't my current focus of my work at this point. Like Stephen said, it's actually about 11 years now I've been writing grants. I've gotten over $4 million. I'm getting pretty close to $5 million in grants for all the companies that I've written for. Over $3 million, probably close to $3.5 million now of those have been for for-profit companies. In 2009, I started my business, Lakeview Consulting, Inc., and in 2013, as Stephen mentioned, I was very proud to have gotten my GPC designation. I am one of a little over 100 GPCs that are certified throughout the United States, and it is a great certification. I highly encourage you, if you're going to be hiring a grant writer at any point, look for a GPC. They've really proven their worth. So now we'll step into the topic of discussion today. So what does a project plan do? And I think I'm missing my header here, Stephen. I'm not sure, but it looks like it. But I think I can move through without it. Basically, a project plan defines the project. It tells you what the project looks like. A good project planning process uses a cross-functional team. And by cross-functional, I mean if you're working in a small nonprofit, for example, your team might be extremely small. It might be 2-3 people at the most. You might have your executive director. It might be you being the development director or the fundraiser, and then probably somebody that's actually providing the services to your clients. There's also sometimes a financial person. I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about the project planning team, but that's the definition of a cross-functional team. It's a team made up of a lot of different functions in your organization. And that project, your goal of project planning is to determine your key plan elements, and we'll talk about those, before you do a funding search or before you document your application. And it's what I am proposing is a structured process that ensures all your bases are covered and that your plan will be effective. So basically what we're doing here, I'm looking at not the step of grant research, I'm looking before that. This is before you do grant research. This is before you fill out an application. You put together your project plan before you do any of that, and that's really an important point. So this slide talks about the reasons why people don't plan projects, because I can tell you, working with both nonprofit and for-profit companies, any time that I have worked with these companies and I ask them, have you put together a project plan? You know, they'll say, we want a grant for X. We want a grant to help teach kids to read. Okay, have you put together a project plan for that? Well, no, not really. We just want to teach kids to read. Okay. So why haven't you put together any kind of a project plan? Why haven't you talked about the budget? Why haven't you talked about your objectives? Well, we really haven't had the time. And, you know, this grant is due next week. We really need to get on this. So lack of time, and most of the time it has to do with some sort of a grant deadline, is one of the biggest reasons I hear for not putting together a project plan. Also, a lot of organizations really don't know how to do it. They don't have a structure for doing it. Excuse me. So basically, when I ask them, did you put together a project plan, they kind of give me that deer in the headlights look like, really, I was supposed to do that? I didn't know that. So they also tend to have, my clients and people that I've worked with have tended to have a lack of understanding of how it fits in their system or how it's beneficial. What good is it going to do for me to do a project plan? I mean, we don't even know if we're going to get this grant. You know, this is what I'm hearing from clients. So really, these are three, I've heard all three of these in some way, shape, or form anytime I've started to talk to any client about trying to do a project plan. So this slide talks about the project team. So I talked about this a little bit more, but depending on the size of your organization, a team should never be more than about 10 or 12 people, and that would be with a really large organization. The reason for that is when you get too many people, as you probably know, when you get too many people in a room, you tend to just get really muddled in side conversations and tangents, and it's just a very hard group to control. I like to see a project team no more than 12, absolutely no more than 12. 6 to 10 is really good. If you're a small organization, like I said, it might be 3 to 5. But you will have representatives. I like to see representatives from these 4 entities. So basically somebody that does your financials, whoever maybe it's your CFO, maybe it's your director of finance, maybe it's your accountant, maybe it's whoever is going to work with the budget, who's going to have to adhere to the budget, who's going to have to manage the budget. You want that person in the room. You want somebody from an executive management standpoint. That is really, really key. A lot of times, as we all know, and you guys may be in this boat, you might be the guy who wears all the hats or the lady that wears all the hats. You might say, you know what, I'm the director of operations, and I really want to delegate this to my staff. I really, I know the project planning is important. I definitely want to see it when it's done, but I don't want to take part in it. And when I'm working with clients on project planning, I really, really discourage that. The reason is that when you put together a project plan, you need to have buy-in very early, particularly if it's a very large project. And that's very hard to do if you don't have a decision maker in the room. So if it can't be your director of operations or your executive director, at least have somebody that's at that management level that can make a decision and that can speak for that management level. And that way you ensure yourself that you're not putting together a plan that just is going to meet with crickets when you send it on to the management staff. The third entity is the service delivery staff. You want somebody on that team that's actually going to be teaching those kids how to read. You want somebody that's actually going to be doing the work, because if you put together a project plan and you get a grant based on that project plan, that person is the person that's going to be responsible. They're also going to be a very valuable project team member because they'll help you identify the activities. They'll help you identify the staffing that might be required. Absent those people, if you put together the project plan and they aren't in the room, you might be assuming it takes perhaps 2 people to teach kids how to read, when it might actually take 10 people to teach the audience of children to read that you want to teach. So you need to really keep those people in the loop, the ones that are going to be delivering the services. And then finally, collaborating organizations. This might not be applicable, but I am a big fan of collaboration when it comes to grants, and we could do a whole webinar on collaboration. It's really, really important. And I am also a big promoter of keeping those people involved as much as possible when you're planning the projects, when you're doing your grant research, and when you're applying for the grants. Again, this goes to buy-in. If you have a collaborating organization that's providing a key service or a service that's key to that project, why wouldn't you want them on the project team? Yes, they're an external person, but you really, if you're going to partner with them to do anything, you really want them to be, quote unquote, in the know from the very beginning. So this is a great way to get your collaborating organizations on board, to really maximize their participation. They might even give you some great ideas of how to better your project as you're planning it. So those are some important things to remember about your project team. Who should be the project leader? Well, in my experience is that a good project leader has these characteristics. They're organized. They can manage a lot of different, they're typically very good multitaskers. They have everything together when they come to the meeting. They have an agenda. They keep their eye on the clock to make sure everything flows. They're just organized people. They're leaders, which it sounds a little repetitive, but there are people that have strong personalities, for example, that are not leaders. So it's good to designate which of those things people on your team might be, and the people that just have strong personalities probably don't need to be the leader. The leader can actually manage the people with the strong personalities and make everybody work together, but a good leader actually coaches the team, works with the team, makes sure that there's somebody directing everything. So that's a good leader, in my opinion at least. They need to be a good delegator as well. So your leader is not the one that's going to put together your whole project plan. They might be the person that documents it. They might be the person that provides significant input into it, but they are not going to be doing everything. For example, the leader typically is not the financial person because they're very focused on that one component of the project. That leader needs to delegate the budget and the financial information, gathering all that and making sure that it's all in the project plan. They need to delegate that. So they need to be a good delegator. And finally, that leader needs to be willing to commit to a long-term project lead role for consistency. So if you do get grant funding, or if your organization chooses to go ahead and do the project without grant funding, either way, that leader should be willing to carry on that role if everybody's satisfied with the job he or she is doing. So these are the 6 elements of the project plan, and to help you, all of you, try to outline the elements more consistently every time, I put together a project planning template. That template is available if you go to my website, and I'll give it to you at the end of the presentation as well. But when you click on the link to that website, or you put in lakeviewconsulting.net, up in the upper right-hand corner, there's a project planning template that's available for anybody that signs up for my weekly email newsletter. I put out a weekly email newsletter. It comes out on Mondays, Monday afternoons typically, and it basically talks about leadership, organizational development, grants. It kind of covers a wide variety of topics. I think you'll find it really interesting because it's not your typical, here's another piece of information about grants. It's much more about the sound. That last week's, for example, was on wisdom, and which is key to being a part of a grant writing team, but it's not particularly directly associated with grant writing. So that template's available, but here are the 6 areas, and we're going to talk about those just in a little bit more detail. So the needs go to, what need does your project meet? So if you've done a needs assessment, if your organization's ever done a needs assessment, you're going to be a lot farther ahead in this process. But even if you haven't, talk amongst your team and say, okay, who are you going to serve and what are their needs? So let's take the children learning how to read as an example. You're going to be serving children, probably children in your community or children in your county or children in a school district. Any of those might be the case. So you identify who you're going to serve and then what are their needs? What needs are leading to this project? So in the case of children learning how to read, maybe it's low reading test scores. Maybe it's the inability of kids to focus on their education because they don't know how to read. So you really need to dig into what the needs are, and sometimes you need to do that needs assessment, or you need to do a survey maybe. If you're working with school kids, for example, maybe you need to survey teachers, maybe you need to do a survey of the kids themselves. So this need, though, is not internal to your organization, and this is really, really important. I tell companies, and I say it laughingly, I don't mean it in a derogatory manner, but when you're thinking about needs, it's not about you. It's not about your organization's needs. You're meeting a community need. You're meeting a bigger picture need. But if you want to buy iPads for your nonprofit and there isn't a larger need being met, I would advise you not to even pursue a grant because, if it's just going to help your people maybe get a little bit more effective, but that doesn't result in better service, that doesn't meet that community need. So that's just an example, and I know some of you might have gotten grants for iPads, and so maybe it wouldn't be applicable to you, but I'm telling you I'm trying to illustrate that this is not really about you or your staff. It's more about the people you're serving. To do research on bigger needs, you can definitely go to census.gov. If you're working with kids, kidscount.org, I believe it is. The Kids Count website is a great website for getting data on kids throughout the country. A needs assessment is wonderful, and I don't know, Stephen, if you guys have done any webinars on needs assessments, but I do know of a couple of them, so feel free to email me if you're interested in getting some information on training, a needs assessment training as well. And then finally, don't think in terms of lack of your solution. So you don't think of your need in terms of we feel the need is for kids to learn how to read because they don't know how to read. Well, or they don't have the resources to read. You really want to put the need in terms of the kids and what their needs are, and not what's not there. You want to propose what you're going to do to fix the problem, if that makes sense. And I got asked to repeat the website to find research info on youth. That is Kids Count, KIDSCOUNT, all one word, and I believe it's kidscount.org. I believe it's kidscount.org. It's the Annie E. Casey Foundation. If you want to do a search for Kids Count or Annie E. Casey, C-A-S-E-Y, they put that out every year. So here's a good needs statement, and it's one that came from a project that actually got funded that I did with a nonprofit. Hispanic parents need to learn to speak English to gain independence and support their school-age children. So this is a very clear needs statement. It's succinct. So that's, thank you. Thank you very much, Stephen. It's succinct. It's easy to put in an application. Because every grant application has some section that asks you for the needs. What are the needs you're meeting? So you've got your answer right here. So the next one is your project activities, and your project activities are going to dictate your project budget. And again, this is where it's really important to have people on your team that can answer to these things. So you'll need to basically, you're going to need to provide estimates to get the supplies you need to do your activities. You're going to need to get the amount of staffing you're going to need. So how many people are going to do your service? How much are your vendors or your partners going to cost, and materials? And then any other things. And in the other, I would encourage you to think of everything. For example, phones, travel, room rental, if you need to get a room, or if somebody's contributing room space. That's important because that's in-kind. And if you don't know what in-kind is generally somebody is donating something to the project, and they're not charging you for it. Or they might be charging you less, and you can call that discounted amount in-kind. In-kind is really important on grant applications because that can actually reduce your cost match. So basically, that is the budget piece of it. And so your project, you need to think in terms of your activities and then your budget. So your activities lead to your budget. Your project outcomes, and I don't know if any of you have heard of the term outcomes. A lot of you may have, especially if you're in the nonprofit sector, because outcomes are pretty important, and they're also very much mixed up with outcomes, or outputs. If any of you worked with logic models are a huge thing and have been for a while in the grants industry. And basically on the right side of your logic model, you have your inputs, which are the people that work on your project. You have your activities, which is what they do. And then you have your objectives, and then you have your outcomes. And you have your outputs. Well, your outputs are things like the number of jobs you're going to create, the number of kids you're going to serve, the number of kids you're going to teach how to read, the number of the increase in testing scores. Outputs are your data, what you expect to increase, what you expect to change. But outcomes are actually what will change as a result of your project. So it's not about the numbers, it's the behaviors. So in the case of the kids learning how to read, it's their increased self-esteem or increased self-confidence. It's their greater ability to be social with others, because kids, honestly, that don't know how to read are probably considered kind of a social pariah, so maybe it will make them more acceptable socially. Maybe it's just an increased knowledge. It's an increased ability to actually put the words together and read. And it might also be greater accessibility. So if you're working with a disabled population, for example, this is a very common outcome, is you might be looking for equipment to help them move better, so they will have greater accessibility, which again can lead to the other outcomes of an increased self-esteem and self-confidence. So this is the executive summary. This is the summary, the project summary, but it's funny because it's always listed first in either a grant application, and it's actually listed first in, I believe it's listed first in the template. I'm drawing a blank here. But anyway, they list it first, but it really should be documented last. So after you put together everything, your needs met, your approach, your start and end date, your budget, and your outcomes, you summarize all that into your project summary. So that is your plan, and like I said, the template will help you through. It'll walk you through all those steps. It gives some definitions in there so that you'll have an easy time using it with your team. So I hope you enjoy using that. You put together a plan. So now what are you going to do with it? So you put together your plan, and maybe you're going to do research. One of the things that the plan can really help you do is develop keywords to do grant research. One of the keys to doing effective grant research is the use of keywords in Foundation Center databases or grants databases, or if you get GrantStation databases. If you do a search on the internet, you can use keywords. But your project description, and my template actually has a section on it for keywords. So when you get all done putting together your project plan, if it's children reading, maybe one of your keywords is literacy. It's what the words you're going to use to search for in a database or on the internet for grants. You can also use the plan to execute the project without any funding. If you decide at the end if your outcomes don't have any alignment with community outcomes or grant funders' outcomes, you might just choose not to pursue grant funding. That's a very likely scenario, as a matter of fact. And now you have all this information. You have a rough budget. You have the activities. You have the amount of staff you're going to need. You really have everything you need to just do it if you choose to do that. You can also use various parts of the project plan for the application. For example, you can use the project description for the project summary for the application. You can use the plan elements such as needs to put into your grant application. So doing that project plan makes your research a lot easier, and it makes your application a lot easier as well. You can also, I like the idea of having several project plans. I know we all have a lot going on. You guys are all really busy, and you might say, hey, it'd be great to do this, and then, it kind of goes on the back, on the back wall or whatever. It goes in that corner of the office. And then the next week you might say, oh, it'd be really great. We talked about that one thing last week. Do you remember what we talked about? What I encourage people to do is just stop, write down your ideas, and you can then compare several project plans. And I agree, Charlotte, it would be really great to have the headers. In the PDF that I sent Stephen, it does have the headers. So hopefully, I think it was just in the transferring it into the ReadyTalk software. So I apologize, but I'm trying to very clearly state what I'm talking about in each slide. So, okay, thank you, Stephen. So basically, if you have several plans, you can compare those. You can say, well, our outcomes here are of a bigger priority to us from a strategic planning standpoint, so we want to do this project before we do any other ones. So it really helps organize your thoughts and organize your decision-making processes. So this is just kind of a summary and a few tips as well. So like I said, you're going to get a free project planning template if you go onto my website and use that. I encourage you to use that. I encourage you to modify it for your own use. If you see something else you want on there, just duplicate it or add to it or edit it or whatever you want to do. Some tips here. Give yourself plenty of time to plan. This process should really not be rushed. I never encourage people to respond to grant applications that are due in a week, regardless of whether you want to do a project plan, because chances are you're going to really put some stuff together in a hurry and you're going to be a lot less likely to get a grant. So give yourself plenty of time to plan. I would suggest planning right in the very beginning stages, just right at the beginning stages. And then do the research. Give yourself plenty of time to plan, do the research, and fill out the application. I also encourage you, if you are putting together a project plan and it is a project you're going to pursue, that you have regular planning meetings. So maybe monthly, especially if it's a larger project. I've worked on a $2.3 million project, and I was the project leader when I worked for a manufacturing company, and we had meetings once a month for 3 years. And I know that sounds like meetings that might not be valuable, but every month all of us got on the same page with the project, so it's really important to have those regular meetings. And finally, use a team. No project should be planned in a vacuum. I do not want any of you to put this project planning template on your desk and try to fill it out for all of your projects. I really want you to get at least one or two other people in the room and bounce everything off them. Absolutely need to do that. Here are some resources. I actually have two websites. This one is actually for grant writers and development directors. It's called the Grants for All website. And you can actually link to that when you go to lakeviewconsulting.net. There's a Grants for All logo on the right-hand side of the page. You can click on that and you can join the group. You can put in your email address there as well. And I send out a monthly email newsletter that's called the Grants for All newsletter, and it gives some grant opportunities. And by the way, they all have deadlines that are at least 2 months out to allow for that project planning and research and the application, everything. So it gives some grant opportunities, tips, and a motivational quote, just because I like quotes. And I do have a training course coming out soon. My book actually outlined what I called the funding equation. And after I wrote the book, I thought it would be a really great idea to do a training course. So I've developed one, and I'm in the process of finalizing. It's going to be a booklet that's going to have hard copy slides and then also DVDs. Training DVDs. They're all only audio because I don't think anybody wants to be subjected to my bright smiling face for 10 different sessions. So basically, project planning, strategic planning, it covers both those, which I believe both are very, very important, by the way. Grant research, completing a grant application. It gives some great resources. I do interviews with grant writers. I do interviews with strategic planning experts. So you can sign up on the website, and you'll be the first to know when you sign up on that website when that will be available. And he just put the link to that website on board. The second resource that I have for you is the For-Profit Grant Writing Guide. It does say for-profit, and I know this is a nonprofit crowd, but you can still benefit, very much benefit from what's in that book. It talks, again, about the funding equation. It goes through a lot of the things on project planning. There's a chapter on project planning. There's a chapter on grant research. It's meant as kind of just a guide. It's a very small little book. It sells for $9.97 on Amazon. But if you put in the discount code, if you go to the website there and you put in the discount code, you can actually get it for 50% off. So you're going to get it for about $5, the cost of a cup of coffee, quite honestly. And basically, so you can get it at 50% off. And it's just it's a really little guide that's, I think it's 50 pages long, and it's just meant, it's got notes pages in it. It's just a way to kind of walk yourself through the grant process. And then it also discusses further how project planning fits into the funding equation. So you can get a little bit different information than you got on this seminar. Finally, I'm also writing another book, and I would encourage you to watch for news. I'll have it on my website. I'll be doing updates on my website and on Grants for All. And watch for news on my next book. It's coming out in the spring of 2016. It's also going to be on for-profit funding, so maybe not real applicable to this audience, but it's going to be a much deeper dive into sources of grant funding for for-profit companies. It's going to have a section for grant writers that want to write for for-profit companies and some of the key considerations. And now that I also would encourage you to go to lake.net. Are there any questions?
Yeah, there are, Micki. That was great. Thanks so much for sharing all that knowledge with us. Really interesting. Lots of people have sent questions already, and I'll kind of go through those. But before I do, just want to encourage folks to ask questions. Maybe if you were sitting on your hands, don't be shy now. We've probably got about maybe 15 or 16 minutes for Q&A. Micki, the first one I saw here is from Jessica. Jessica's wondering, how do you suggest working with teams that don't give you the information you need in a timely manner for preparing grant applications? What about working with people who are maybe dragging their feet or can't get that info?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jessica, because that's something a lot of people actually run into. There's two key tips I can give you on that. One is, again, to start the planning process very early, as you possibly can, when you first get the idea, and to involve all the people that are key to the process early. You don't want to bring them in at the end when you're needing information from them. You actually want to bring them in very early. And so the big key to good project planning is buy-in. Buy-in is critical. So I think one of the reasons why, at least in my experience, one of the reasons why people drag their feet is they don't understand their role in the process. I also encourage people to put together a timeline in conjunction with their project plan. It needs to be really clear to people that if we want to get this grant application put in by this date, we have to have information by this date. And then again, that goes to the role of the leader as well. You have to have somebody that's strong enough and disciplined enough to go to a person and say, listen, I needed information from you. It's set it on the timeline on this date, and it's 2 days later, I haven't gotten it. You're jeopardizing the grant application. So just three key things. Just make sure they understand their role, make sure that the leader is a good leader that is able to actually make stuff happen, and then involve everybody early. Yeah.
Cool, great. There's more of a comment here than a question, but I'll read it to you, Micki. Maybe you can share your advice with her. Corin here is saying, one of the things I struggle with is establishing agreement on who should lead the team. Between grant writers, program leaders. What do you think about choosing that leader? Are there any hard and fast rules in terms of job titles, or is it more just all the characteristics and willingness that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on your organization. I've seen external grant writers organizations be project leaders. I've led projects for other organizations. So sometimes that's very helpful, by the way, if you want an outside perspective. That can be very, very helpful. So if you're afraid of having too many tangents or too much, not enough collaboration within the team, you might want to get an external, like a grant writer or a consultant, to actually lead your team for you. Program leaders are a lot of times the team leaders, but that isn't always the case. Sometimes it's the director of development because they have kind of that big picture. So it really depends on your organization and how you're structured.
Makes sense. Speaking of grant writers, since you brought it up, a couple people asked about that. Melanie, two-part question here. Where should we look for when looking for a certified grant writer? Where should we look? What should we look for? And what's an appropriate fee to pay those folks? Any insights there?
As far as looking for a certified grant writer, if you go to grantcredential.org, there is a list of grant professionals certified throughout the country. I believe it's a tab at the top of the page, and that is one way. That's one way to find them, and you can actually do a Google search probably for Grant Professional Certified or Grant Professional Certification Institute to get to that website as well. As far as what's an appropriate fee, that really varies. If you're newer to the profession, if your grant writer is newer, they will probably charge a little less. And if they're less experienced, they're going to charge a little bit less. I really hate to talk about fees because it really depends on the scope of the project. So I guess I'm just going to say you're going to pay for experience. You're going to pay for knowledge in a lot of cases. I'd be very wary of somebody that comes in and charges you $20 an hour to write a grant because they're either really desperate for business, by the way, maybe for a reason, or they just really haven't been in the business long enough to do it. But I also don't think it's right to charge $200 an hour. So I guess it's somewhere between $20 and $200, but it just depends on your project. It just depends on your project.
Fair enough. Got a lot more questions coming in. I appreciate everyone chiming in. Patty here is wondering, what do you say? Would you say the project planning process is like putting together a business plan? Are there some similarities there? It seems like the answer is yes, but what do you think about that?
It's a similar process, but it's very specific to a project, where a business plan is more big picture. Business plan is about your organization and the finances and your plans and your strategy. Now, strategic planning is also another good complement to project planning. So there's a lot of plans going on here, but business planning I kind of think of in terms of what you would give a bank to get funding, or you might give an economic development organization to show them how organized you are. A strategic plan really drives the activities of your organization and kind of gives you that true north. A project plan is the lowest level of detail. It is the most detailed part of any of those plans. So your business talks about, here's our business, here's what we do, here's how in general we're going to do it. Your strategic plan, you go a little bit more in depth and say, here's our strategy, here's our strategic objectives, here's our goals, and then you drill down even farther to get to the project plan. So I hope that kind of explains it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Stephanie's here wondering, do you know of any websites that nonprofits can use to search for grant opportunities, maybe where there are listings of people who are giving away grants? Any resources like that exist that you know of?
Actually, well, unfortunately, a lot of them are paid unless Foundation Center works with libraries in larger metropolitan areas. And you can actually go to, for example, the St. Louis Public Library, and you can access their biggest database for free. So that's a great way to get the information if you're low on funds or if your budget is very restricted, which I don't know too many nonprofits that their budgets aren't somewhat restricted. So that's one way. You can actually pay for that Foundation Center. If you're a nonprofit, it's a great resource. GrantStation is another one, but those are both paid databases. I see somebody raise their hand, so maybe somebody's got a better idea.
Oh yeah, I think that. Yeah, Megan, if you have something to chime in there, please do add it to the chat, and we'll say it for everyone. While she's doing that, here's one from Carolyn. Any advice for startup nonprofits? I know there's probably a few of you listening. Are we to wait until we have been providing services for a while before applying grants? Can they apply for grants right away, even though they're young? Is there any relationship between the age of the organization, Micki, and how they can apply for grants?
Yeah, that's a really great question because I get a lot of calls from very new organizations, and I know it's not great news, but you really are putting the cart in front of the horse if you're trying to apply for a grant right out of the gate. It is much better. It is much better to have strong financials, a good funding plan. You want to look at your funding strategy. How do you, absent of grants, how are you going to fund this organization? If your answer is we are 100% donation based, you're really vulnerable. I have to say that, and maybe it's fundraising, but I mean that's a really scary thing for an organization. So, but if you have a good fundraising base and you want to supplement that with grants, that is the time to do it. But you need to get a good financial base under you. Funders are not going to fund brand new organizations because they can't prove that they can run themselves. They want to see organizational capacity to run a project, and they're not going to be real confident of that if you've only been doing it for 2 weeks.
Right. Makes sense. Here's one from Cassandra. Cassandra has, she's got her team together. The project planning team consists of 3 people. Do you think that having that small a team is why maybe they've been denied some grants? What do you think about actual team size? Is 3 too small? Does that really matter in terms of grant success in general? What about the size of teams?
More than likely, if they put together project plans, or if they've put together applications and they haven't gotten funded, a few things could be happening, honestly. One is that they maybe didn't do a project plan and they didn't identify their outcomes, or if they did, their outcomes really weren't consistent with the funders' outcomes. There's a lot of competition for grants, so you need to be very sure when you put together a grant application that you identify how your outcomes are consistent with the funders' outcomes. They need to align very, very closely, and you need to show that. So that could be one reason. I don't think it's the size of your team. It might be the makeup of your team. Maybe there's nobody there that's actually delivering services. It goes back to that ideal team, but you really need to have all those people on your team. And if you're only a 3-person organization, like I said, it could be all 3 of you people, but you all probably have that role, some role that's commensurate with that. And again, if you're really, really small, collaborations are great. Collaborations are phenomenal. Get people to collaborate with you for a grant. Work with another nonprofit. Work with a hospital. Work with a school. If you're an animal rights organization, work with veterinarians. I mean, there's all kinds of collaborators.
Makes sense. Here's one from Sandra. Sandra says, we're a rare disease nonprofit, so our ongoing mission is to find a cure. So hopefully they're working to put themselves out of business. That's always good. It's not project-based, but given the funders' needs for timelines and hard outcomes, I would assume, how should they progress in terms of assigning this as a – she's saying it's not project-based. What advice would you have for Sandra there, given the nature of her nonprofit?
Well, I would challenge the notion that maybe it's not project-based. She might not be thinking of it in those terms, but when she applies, I guess maybe she's saying she applies for general operating support, in which case her project is actually their organization. It is actually, she needs to think in terms of what their organization does and kind of frame it like a project, if that makes sense. She needs to look at the outcomes. Yeah. She needs to look at her budget, make sure she very clearly understands the activities that they're going to need to undertake to do that research. Is she doing the research, or is her organization doing the research, or are they funding the research? They're raising money to do the research, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So I think their project is actually supporting cancer research or whatever the rare disease is. I think that is their project, and they approach it that way. But it will give them more clarity when they apply for grants. So, and by the way, they might have a problem because a lot of funders fund directly research for different grants, and what they might be doing is covering some area where funders don't fund, so they're doing a foundation for it. And by the way, that's absolutely admirable, but they may run up against trying to find grants that will fund them to fund somebody else. You know what I'm saying? It's just
right.
a little bit, yeah.
Okay, cool. One from Benjamin. Any advice from nonprofits in U.S. territories, not necessarily in the United States proper? Many funding opportunities are limited to just the states. Micki, have you had an experience with the territories? Any advice for Benjamin there?
Can you repeat the question? Territories? Okay,
So I think I did not get a great grade in geography. I think that's referring to maybe Puerto Rico or American Samoa, those kinds of territories.
I don't have a lot of experience with grants outside the country. I do know there are grants targeted to, I know there are grants that are out there for the U.S. territories that are specifically through, another source, by the way, of government funding that is completely free is grants.gov. Grants.gov is a wonderful website, and he can actually search by the territories to see what, you can search by a state or territory, you can search by topic, you can search by department that you're looking to get funding from. So it's every government grant runs through grants.gov.
Cool, okay. And he's saying, great, check that out, Benjamin. He's saying he's in the Virgin Islands, so hopefully there'll be something there for him. Great. I think we got one more here, and then Micki, I want to give you the last word to talk about yourself a little bit more. Patty's wondering if you could just touch on outcomes again, as in how to determine them and detail them in our project plans. Can you break down that kind of concept of outcomes real quick?
Sure. What I tell companies to do when I'm working with them and we're talking about outcomes, because everybody wants to think of them in terms of outputs. They want to look at how many jobs are we going to create, how many people are we going to serve. That isn't an outcome. The question you need to ask yourself in that whole outcomes determination is, what is going to change as a result of us doing this project? So, for example, I did a grant for Hispanic, to teach Hispanic parents English as a second language. The output was that we were going to train, I think, 80 parents. This nonprofit was going to train 80 parents. But the outcome was that they were going to be better able to help their kids with their homework. They were going to be better able to communicate with others in the community. We live in small communities where there aren't a lot of Hispanic people. So that's an example. You really need to ask yourself, ask your team, if we do this, what's going to change? So to the lady's point before that was doing funding research, their outcome is going to be that more funding will be possible to do research, which will result in, hopefully, eradication of the disease.
Right. Well, cool. I think we got through all the questions, and I know we're getting very close to the end time. I don't want to keep people too much longer, especially if they haven't eaten lunch. Micki, I've got your contact information up on the screen. How can folks get a hold of you? We take more questions offline. What should folks do after this webinar?
If you have any questions, feel free to email me at micki@lakeviewconsulting.net. Again, I want to reiterate, I don't write grants for nonprofits, but if you go to the GPA or the GPCI website, you can find plenty that do. There's a lot of them out there. I would also encourage any one of you that works with grants or that is a development director to look at the Grant Professionals Association in your area. It's at grantprofessionals.org. It's a great association. You can join the local chapters for very little money. It's a great way to network with other development directors, to talk to grant writers. You can meet a lot of grant writers at those meetings, and they're all over the country. So just a little plug for the Grant Professionals Association. You can reach me at, I prefer email, micki@lakeviewconsulting.net. And then, like I said, go to my website. You can sign up for my newsletter. And by the way, when you sign up for the newsletter, there's about a 2-hour delay before you receive the email back. You should get an email from me with the link to the template. So, Jessica, it's coming. So basically, you can sign up for my newsletter, and then you can sign up for the Grants for All website. And again, keep your eye out for the training. It's going to be a very low-cost training. I did some market research and found that there was a real need for people to be able to sit at their desk and do training on grants. And that's what I really want to provide, because not all of us have the time to go to a week-long grants training away from our offices, or we want to do it at night after the kids go to bed type of thing. So you can look at, and my blog, my weekly newsletter that is right there on the website as well. So you can get all, and by the way, I guess one other thing I should mention is that while I don't write grants for nonprofits, I actually do coaching for grant writers. And so if any of you are new to grant writing, or even like development directors or people that work heavily with grants, I found that grant writing is a very deadline-driven, stressful business sometimes. And we have a really hard time, us grant writers, making everything work well together, making everything click on all cylinders sometimes. So that work-life balance is a real issue. So I do coaching for, and you can find out more by clicking on coaching on my website. And you can find out more about my coaching packages. And I'd be more than happy to talk to anybody about that as well.
Cool. Yeah, definitely check that out. Obviously, Micki's an expert. Micki, this is really awesome having you. Thanks for sharing all your knowledge and all those resources. This is a lot of fun.
I'd be happy to come back anytime. Thanks a lot, Matthew. Or Stephen, sorry.
And that's okay. And just so everyone knows, lots more resources on our website as well. We do these weekly webinars every Thursday. Also got some downloadables. We got our video podcast. You can sign up for our newsletter, which is called the Nonprofit Wrap-Up. And we have a daily blog post as well. So check that out. Maybe something there that piques your interest. And like I said, we've got a lot of webinars coming up. These are just two that I kind of wanted to highlight. We're going to be covering a lot of storytelling later on in May. So Lori Jacobwith is our guest 1 week from today. She's going to be talking about storytelling for the board specifically, kind of coaching them through how they should talk about your organization when they're out in the world. And then we're going to talk about 2 weeks from then how you as a fundraiser or you as fundraising staff can tell your story in a short and concise manner. So check those out. There's also lots more a lot more webinars scheduled out into the future. Might find an interesting topic there. But thanks for being here. Thanks for taking an hour out of your day. Like I said before, I will be sending out the recording and the slides via email, so look for that. When you close out of this webinar, you're going to get a quick survey. We'd love to hear your feedback. Don't be shy at all. And we would love to see you again, hopefully next Thursday. So final thanks, and we will talk to you again hopefully next week. So goodbye now.
Thank you, Stephen. Bye-bye.